The words still echo in Fola's ears, sharper than any slap. You and your kid are just freeloaders. Her own brother, Jimo, the same man she took in when he lost everything, screamed those words while standing in her living room, surrounded by furniture she bought, walls she painted, and a roof she paid for. Little Meso, her 6-year-old son, stood frozen behind her legs, clutching his teddy bear as his uncle's rage filled the room. Fola didn't cry, not then. She simply looked at her brother, then whispered, "You've forgotten whose name is on the deed." That night, something inside her shifted. She wasn't going to beg anymore. She wasn't going to protect people who couldn't even say thank you. And by the time Jimo realized what he had done, it was too late. Fola was the kind of woman who carried everyone's burden without complaining. After losing her parents, she became the rock of the family, the one everyone called when things went wrong. She worked long hours at a small office to feed her little boy, Meso, and still found the strength to check on her relatives, send money, and offer advice. Her heart was big, maybe too big. When her younger brother Jimo lost his job and his small apartment, she didn't think twice before opening her door. Family comes first, she told herself, smiling as she made space for him in the spare room. At first, things felt warm again. Jimo played with Meso, helped with groceries sometimes, and brought laughter back into the house. They would eat dinner together, watch TV, and talk late into the night about how life used to be when their parents were alive. For a moment, it felt like family again, like the old days before life got so hard. Fola was happy seeing her brother smile again. She believed maybe this was God's way of bringing them closer. But slowly, small changes began to show. Jimo started waking up late, skipping chores, and leaving dishes everywhere. He borrowed Fola's car, saying he needed it just for a quick errand, and came back hours later with no explanation. He began inviting his friends over without asking, laughing loudly into the night, while Fola tried to get Meso to sleep. She didn't want to scold him. After all, he was her brother, and she didn't want to make him feel unwanted. She told herself, he's just adjusting. Things will get better. Days turned into weeks, and Jimo became more comfortable. Too comfortable. He stopped saying thank you. He began acting like the house was his, changing the TV channel even when Fola was watching, eating food she cooked without leaving any for her. Once, when she gently reminded him about bills, he brushed it off and said, "You're doing fine, sis. Don't stress." Those words stung, but Fola stayed quiet. She didn't want fights, not in front of Meso. What started as love and loyalty began to feel like a heavy chain around her neck. Fola still tried to believe in family, but deep down, something in her heart whispered that peace doesn't last long when people mistake kindness for weakness. It started so small that Fola almost didn't notice. Jimo borrowed her car one morning without asking, saying he needed to run a quick errand. He returned late in the evening with an empty tank and no apology. The next day, he invited his friends over while she was at work. She came home to laughter, music, and strangers sitting on her couch, drinking her juice. When she asked why he didn't tell her, Jimo simply shrugged and said, "It's our house, isn't it?" That one word, "our," stuck in her chest, but she said nothing. Fola tried to stay calm. She told herself, maybe he's just going through a rough time. But soon, it became clear that Jimo was getting too comfortable. He never helped with chores, plates would pile up in the sink, laundry would sit untouched, and the house she had once kept spotless began to feel heavy and messy. When she gently reminded him to clean up after himself, he would laugh and say, "You love doing these things anyway, Fola. You're good at it." He meant it as a joke, but it didn't feel funny. Then came the money issues. Jimo started borrowing small amounts, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, always promising to pay back next week. That week never came. One afternoon, Fola discovered he had used her credit card to order expensive sneakers online. When she confronted him, he brushed it off with a grin. "Relax, sis. I'll pay you back after my business deal closes." There was no business deal. Still, Fola kept quiet. She didn't want to embarrass him. She didn't want to be the sister who pushed family away. The disrespect grew in other ways too. Jimo began questioning how she raised Meso. If Meso cried, Jimo would roll his eyes and say, "You're spoiling that boy." If dinner was simple, rice and stew, he'd complain, "Can't you cook something better for once?" He didn't care that Fola worked all day, coming home tired just to make sure her family ate. Each comment chipped at her spirit, Piece by piece, Fola would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when her home stopped feeling like home. She wanted to speak up, but feared that it would cause a family fight. She told herself to be patient, to give him time to find his way. But deep down, something inside her was breaking. She didn't yet realize she was no longer just raising her son. She was also raising her brother, a grown man who had forgotten what gratitude meant. That Friday evening, Fola returned home after a long, draining day at work. All she wanted was silence, a simple meal, a warm bath, and a quiet evening with her son. But as she reached her gate, she heard loud music thundering from inside. Her heart sank. When she opened the door, her once peaceful living room was unrecognizable. Empty bottles covered the table, strangers danced around with drinks in hand, and cigarette smoke filled the air. Messo's toys were pushed into a corner, and her couch, the one she had saved months to buy, was now stained with spilled wine. Standing in the middle of it all was Jimo, laughing loudly, holding a bottle, and acting like the king of the house. When Fola stepped in, everyone stared for a moment, but quickly went back to their noise. She called out, "Jimo, what's going on here?" He turned, clearly annoyed by her tone. "Relax, Fola. We're just having fun. Don't act like you own the world." She tried to stay calm, asking him quietly to end the party. But Jimo suddenly exploded. His voice cut through the noise. "You think you're better than everyone because you have a job?" He stepped closer, his words sharp and cruel. "You and your kid are just freeloaders in your own house." For a second, the whole room froze. The laughter stopped. Even the music seemed to fade. Fola stood there, frozen in shock, her heart pounding. Her little boy, Meso, peeked from behind her legs, clutching his teddy bear tightly, confusion and fear in his small eyes. Fola looked at Jimo, her mouth dry, her mind blank. She had given him everything: food, shelter, love. And this was what she got in return. Without shouting or crying, she straightened her back and said softly, "Everyone, please leave my house." Her calm voice carried more power than any scream could. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and one by one, they left, whispering as they went. Jimo tried to speak again, but she didn't look at him. She quietly helped Meso into his room, tucked him in and kissed his forehead. That night, Fola sat alone in the dark living room, surrounded by the mess he had made. Tears welled in her eyes but never fell. Something inside her broke, not in weakness but in awakening. She knew at that moment she was done begging for respect in her own home. From that night forward, she promised herself things would never be the same again. After that painful night, Fola decided she wouldn't waste her energy fighting. She had shouted and cried before in her life, and it never changed anything. This time she chose silence. But her silence wasn't weakness, it was the beginning of a plan. She woke up early every morning, went to work as usual, smiled when she had to, and acted as if nothing had happened. But inside, she was building a quiet storm. At work during lunch breaks, she sat alone, going through her bank statements on her phone. Line by line, she traced every expense: the rent, the bills, the groceries, even the fuel for the car Jimo used without asking. She started keeping every receipt neatly in a folder. It wasn't about revenge, it was about proof. For years, she had been the one carrying everyone, and she was tired of people pretending she didn't. One afternoon, she decided to talk to a lawyer at her office who handled housing cases. The woman listened carefully and asked a few questions. When Fola handed her some of the documents, the lawyer frowned. "Did you know someone has registered a business using your address?" Fola blinked in surprise. "A business?" The lawyer nodded and showed her a printout. There it was, Jimo's name, her home address, and his fake company title. That moment hit Fola harder than his insults. He hadn't just disrespected her. He had used her name and her house to make himself look important. That night, when she got home, Jimo was bragging on a phone call about his new business. She walked past him without a word. She didn't ask, didn't argue. She just smiled faintly and went to her room. From that day, she began collecting evidence more carefully. Every electricity bill, every rent receipt, every transfer she made to cover his emergencies, she kept it all in a blue folder labeled Home Records. While Jimo went around town acting like a successful man rebuilding his life, Fola kept her calm. He told people proudly, "My house is finally stable again." not realizing that the very roof above his head belonged to the sister he mocked. Fola stopped cooking extra food, stopped cleaning up after his mess, and stopped explaining herself. She was preparing for the day he would see the truth, that the home he claimed was his stood only because of her strength and quiet endurance. A week after that night, Fola finally decided it was time to take her power back. She had stayed quiet long enough. That morning, she cooked breakfast for Meso, packed his lunch, and got him ready for school. Then she waited for Jumo to come out of his room. When he finally walked into the living room, humming and scrolling through his phone, Fola spoke calmly. "Jumo," she said, "we need to talk." He barely looked up, mumbling. "About what?" Fola's voice was steady. "It's time you start paying rent. Officially." For a second, he stared at her in disbelief, then burst into laughter. "Rent? You're serious?" he said, shaking his head. "This place is as much mine as yours, Fola. Stop acting like you're the only one holding things together." Fola didn't raise her voice. She simply took out a small envelope from the table and handed it to him. Inside was a printed rent agreement with his name on it. "If you believe it's your house," she said softly, "then sign it." His smile vanished. "You're unbelievable," he snapped. "I've been helping you, and now you want to treat me like a tenant." He stormed off, muttering under his breath, slamming the door behind him. Fola sat still, breathing deeply. She had heard enough excuses, enough guilt trips. That was the moment she truly felt done. The next afternoon, Jumo went out as usual for one of his so-called business meetings. Fola used that time to do what she had planned for days. She called a locksmith, changed all the locks in the house, and packed his clothes neatly into a large box. She didn't touch anything else. No yelling, no breaking things. She only wanted peace. When Jumo returned in the evening, he found the gate locked. He banged on it, shouting her name. Fola stepped out quietly, holding the box in her hands. "What is this?" "Nonsense," he shouted. Fola looked at him, her face calm, her eyes tired but firm. "You said I was a freeloader," she said softly. "I'm freeing you." Jumo froze, speechless. She placed the box outside the gate and walked back inside without another word. That was the day Fola stopped being the sister who always gave, and became the woman who finally chose herself. The air in her house felt lighter that night. For the first time in a long while, she slept without fear or anger. Only peace and quiet, the kind she had always deserved. The moment Jumo realized he had been locked out, he didn't stay silent. Within hours, the story had spread like wildfire across the family. By the next morning, Fola's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her aunties, cousins, and even distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years were calling to scold her. Some didn't even ask what had happened. They had already taken sides. "Fola, how could you do that to your own brother?" one auntie shouted over the phone. "He's family. Family doesn't throw family out." Fola listened quietly, letting them speak. She didn't defend herself. She knew no explanation would make sense to people who only saw part of the story. They hadn't been there when Jumo insulted her. They didn't see him turn her home into a playground. All they saw was a man claiming his sister threw him into the streets. He played the victim well. He cried over the phone to relatives, saying she had changed, that success had made her proud. One cousin even came to her house, demanding to know why she had disgraced her brother. Fola stayed calm and offered tea, though her hands trembled. Inside, she was hurt, not by Jumo anymore, but by how quickly her own family turned against her. These were the same people who had ignored her when she was struggling to feed Meso. None of them had offered to babysit, send help, or even visit when her son was sick. But now, when she finally stood up for herself, they found their voices. At night, after putting Meso to bed, Fola sat on the edge of her bed and thought about everything. A small part of her felt guilty. She had always been the one to fix things, to carry others no matter what. But deep down, she knew this time was different. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had just protected her peace. Yet the guilt still lingered, heavy and quiet. Days passed, and the calls continued. Some relatives tried to guilt-trip her with emotional words like, "What would your parents think?" Others hinted that she was cursed for chasing her brother away. But Fola didn't break. She simply replied, "If my parents were here, they would understand. They raised me to be kind, not to be used." Even though she felt lonely, she also felt lighter. The house was quiet again, peaceful even. For the first time in a long while she could breathe. Fola finally understood that some people only love you when you are giving. And the moment you stop, they call you selfish. But this time, she refused to carry that weight anymore. After Jimo was gone, the house felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet at first. Fola would wake up in the mornings and still expect to hear the sound of him moving around, but there was only silence. For a few days, that silence felt heavy, almost lonely. But soon, she began to realize it wasn't emptiness, it was peace. No more tension, no more insults, no more walking on eggshells in her own home. For the first time in years, she could breathe freely. She started using that peace to rebuild her life. Fola had always been passionate about making natural skincare products. Body butters, soaps, and oils she used to make for herself and a few friends. Before, it had just been a small hobby she squeezed in between her job and household chores. But now she decided to take it seriously. She began to dream again, this time for herself and for Meso. Every evening after work, she sat at her small kitchen table with her notebook open, writing ideas and plans. She watched free online tutorials about branding, marketing, and small business management. It wasn't easy, but she was determined. On weekends, she took pictures of her products with her phone and posted them online. At first, only a few people ordered, but she didn't lose hope. She reinvested every penny she made, buying better containers, improving her labels, and creating more scents. Meso loved helping her. After school, he would rush home, wash his hands, and help pack the soaps and body butters into boxes. He always said proudly, "We're a team, mommy." Those simple words gave Fola strength. Together, they would laugh, talk, and sometimes dance around while packing orders. The house that once echoed with shouting now overflowed with joy and laughter. One day, a popular local influencer ordered her products and shared them online. Overnight, her small page started getting attention. More people began reaching out, asking about her products and placing orders. Fola was shocked but grateful. She worked harder, staying up late to make enough items to meet the growing demand. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was building something of her own. Months passed, and her little business slowly turned into a recognized brand. She started receiving messages from other single mothers asking how she managed to start from nothing. Fola always replied kindly, encouraging them never to give up. Her story began inspiring others without her even trying. At night, when she tucked Meso into bed, he would hug her and whisper, "I'm proud of you, mommy." And she would smile, realizing that peace had given her power. Her home, once filled with noise and disrespect, now held purpose, laughter, and love. Fola finally felt like she was living, not just surviving. Months passed, and Fola's life had started to bloom again when one quiet evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it and froze. Standing there was Jimo, but not the Jimo she remembered. He looked thinner, his once confident smile replaced with tired, hollow eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, and his shoes were worn out. It was clear life had not been kind to him. He forced a weak smile, trying to sound casual. "Hey Fola, long time." Fola didn't reply immediately. She just stood there, her mind replaying the words he once threw at her. "Freeloader, burden ungrateful." He cleared his throat and said, "Listen, I just need a place to stay for a week. Things have been rough. My business went bad. Friends turned their backs. I just need time to get back on my feet." Fola's heart ached a little. Despite everything, she wasn't the kind of woman who took joy in seeing someone broken. But the memories of how he mocked her, how he drained her kindness and left her with nothing, flashed before her eyes. He had laughed when she asked him to contribute. He had called her selfish when she chose peace. Now here he was, standing in the same spot where he once claimed ownership over everything she had built. She looked at him quietly, her son Meso standing behind her. Jimo noticed the little boy and gave a weak smile. "Hey champ, you've grown," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Meso didn't reply. He just held his mother's hand tighter. Fola finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Jimo," she said, "this home used to be full of shouting, blame, and pain. When you left, peace returned. I can't let that go again." He looked down, his pride breaking piece by piece. "Please Fola. I just need somewhere to rest." His tone carried the same desperation that once lived in her own heart when she used to beg for understanding. But Fola had learned something powerful. Helping people who refuse to change only drags you back into their storm. She took a small breath and said softly, "You once told me I was a freeloader. Maybe now you understand what it feels like to be on the other side." Her eyes glistened, not with anger, but with clarity. "Sometimes losing comfort," she continued, "is the only way we learn gratitude." For a moment, silence filled the air. Jimo lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. Fola slowly closed the gate, not with bitterness but with peace. As she walked back inside, Meso whispered, "Mommy, was that the man who hurt you?" Fola nodded gently. "Yes, baby," she said. "But life already taught him the lesson I couldn't." And for the first time, she didn't feel pity. Only strength. Fola's small business that started in her living room slowly began to grow beyond her imagination. Word spread through the town about the woman who made natural skincare products with her own hands and built a brand from nothing. People started calling her Madame Fola, the woman who turned pain into purpose. Orders came from nearby towns, and soon, she couldn't handle them all alone. Instead of hiring strangers, she decided to give other women the same chance she once wished for. She reached out to single mothers in her community, women who were struggling just like she once did. Some had been abandoned, some had lost their jobs, and some had never worked before. Fola gathered them in her small workshop, showed them how to mix oils, label jars, and package orders. "If I can do it, so can you," she told them with a smile. The women were nervous at first, but Fola's calm encouragement made them believe in themselves. Slowly, they began earning their own money, feeding their children, and finding dignity again. The change didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who once gossiped about Fola started praising her. Local markets displayed her products proudly, and even the same relatives who once called her heartless now spoke of her with respect. One day, an aunt who had scolded her for sending Jimo away visited her shop. She looked around at the busy women working, the laughter in the air, and said softly, "Fola, you've done something special here." Fola smiled politely. "Auntie, I just learned that when life shuts a door, you can build your own house instead." The aunt nodded slowly, finally understanding what strength truly meant. Fola never bragged or sought revenge. She didn't post her success to shame anyone or boast about her past pain. She simply worked hard, helped others, and proved that peace and progress come when you choose yourself. People began sharing her story. The woman who turned family rejection into community empowerment. Soon the local radio invited her to speak. She talked about boundaries, forgiveness, and self-respect in her gentle voice. "Saying no doesn't make you cruel," she said. "It means you've learned your worth." Her words touched hearts, especially of women who had silently suffered for years. Even Jimo heard about her success. He didn't dare show up again, but everyone knew he finally saw what he had lost. Not just a home, but a woman of strength and grace. Fola's story wasn't about revenge or pride. It was about transformation, showing her town that kindness without limits becomes pain, and that true respect is never demanded. It's earned through courage, boundaries, and love that starts from within. One quiet Sunday morning, sunlight filled the small house that once carried so much tension. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen, as Meso helped pack boxes for delivery. Their little skincare business had become something bigger than either of them imagined. Shelves were full, orders were lined up, and laughter had replaced the arguments that used to echo through those same walls. As they worked together, Meso suddenly stopped and looked up at his mother with innocent eyes. "Mommy," he asked softly, "do you think Uncle Jimo hates us?" The question caught Fola off guard for a moment. She looked at her son, the same boy who once cried quietly in his room after hearing cruel words from his uncle. Now he stood tall, confident, smiling. Fola brushed a strand of hair from her face and replied gently, "No, baby. He doesn't hate us. He just didn't understand love without taking. But someday he will." Her voice was calm, without bitterness. She had no anger left inside her, only peace. Later that afternoon, they loaded boxes into their old car to deliver to local shops. Meso laughed as he balanced the lighter ones, pretending to be the delivery boss. Fola watched him with pride swelling in her chest. Her son was growing up surrounded by joy, not fear, by the strength of a mother who refused to be broken. As she closed the car trunk, she looked back at her house, the same house Jimo once claimed as his. It looked different now, not because of paint or furniture, but because of the energy inside it. It was finally a home, warm, calm, and full of love. The walls that once held anger now carried laughter. The rooms that once echoed with arguments now sang with music and quiet gratitude. Fola thought of Jimo sometimes, wondering where life had taken him. But there was no more pain in her heart, only lessons. She realized that not everyone who calls you family truly understands love, and not everyone who leaves deserves to return. Sometimes peace comes when you stop trying to fix what was never yours to carry. That evening, as the sun set, Fola sat by the window sipping tea while Meso watched cartoons. A soft smile touched her lips. She didn't need an apology. She didn't need revenge. She just needed peace, and she had found it. In that small, quiet victory, Fola finally understood. Sometimes the greatest success is not in proving others wrong, but in living so peacefully that you no longer need to. If you felt Fola's journey and the strength it took to stand up for herself, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with everyone who needs a reminder that boundaries are not cruelty, and self-respect is power. Tag a friend who always puts others first. Hit like if you believe kindness should never be taken for granted, and comment below. What would you do if you were in Fola's shoes?